New York in the late 1980s was a chaotic and divided city. Drugs, gangs, criminals.
Under police, the city with crime out of control. New York's now the capital of racial violence. None of us is safe, even if you lock yourself behind doors.
New York City was definitely not a safe place. With crime at an all-time high, the people were afraid.
A brutal attack in Central Park.
The group is running in a pack of more than 25 youths.
Skull fractures, a significant loss of blood, and advanced hypothermia.
Most people have heard at least some reference in the last few days to the attacks here in New York one night last week on a number of people in the city's Central Park, especially the brutal attack and rape of a young woman who was out jogging.
That was just one of 8 attacks that night in Central Park. An attack that left Trisha Miley in a coma for 12 days and 5 undeserving teenagers in handcuffs. While in police custody, teenagers Kevin Richardson, Raymond Santana, Antron McCray, Yusuf Salam, and Corey Wise faced a grueling process of interrogation. A process that lasted over 5 hours long, with mostly no adults present, meant only to wear them down to the point of a confession.
Some of the young men who've been arrested in connection with the attack, so young as to be children really,
These coerced confessions only pushed public attention further to the conclusion that the boys were guilty. There was no second guessing. The jogger case builds to become a case that would soon consume the entire country, the case of the century. As a result of overwhelming national involvement, the Central Park Five were forced to break barriers of racial discrimination in a nation that had already predetermined their guilt by proving their innocence.
The police said there was no motive for any of the attacks. They said one of the teenagers explained the group had simply wanted to go what they called wilding.
We are in a crisis. This is happening every day. I mean, it's part and parcel of so many young, especially black males.
Because it was young blacks, on a young white woman in the richest real estate on that Central Park, and it had the word rape in it.
Fear would soon turn into anger, resulting in a media tsunami that would point fingers and place blame into the hands of 5 young black and Latino kids. An already bad system of crime in New York City, on top of their confessions, made it easy for people to form opinions on who the culprits were. The public felt horribly for Trisha, and out of fear for the state of their city, they pushed to solve the case. Journalists became competitive in covering the case, so much so that they put out article after article on the wilding wolf pack in Central Park. Just 2 weeks after the attack, New York business mogul of the time and future President Donald Trump issued a newspaper urging for their conviction. He went so far as to push for the revival of the death penalty for them.
Of course I hate these people, and let's all hate these people, because maybe hate is what we need if we're going to get something done.
We don't know who did that crime, and the court's going to decide who did that crime. Were you prejudging those arrested?
Park. Today, 7 of those teenagers were arraigned on a long list of charges, including rape and attempted murder.
The trial ended in a quick close, despite no eyewitnesses or DNA evidence and major inconsistencies within their stories. The trial found them guilty and sentenced them to prison ranging from 6 to 13 years. It was later said by defense counsel William Warren that he thought Trump's ads in 1989 had played a role in securing a conviction. However, this wasn't the first time the United States had seen racial politics determine the outcome of a case. People of color, in particular black men, have faced an unusual justice system pitted against them since the early foundings of this nation. Seen in the Scottsboro Boys case from the 1930s, the Trenton Six from the 1940s, and the Harlem Six from the 1960s, racial injustice often finds its way in cases involving a white victim with minority suspects. Protesters pushed for the teens to be sentenced to adult punishment. The Central Park Five were sent to juvenile centers and prisons with kids that had committed serious crimes. Corey Wise, just 16 at the time, was sent to an adult facility, subject to great violence and abuse as well as solitary confinement. Despite this, the boys, their families, and those who supported them continued to break barriers of injustice. Even after being offered parole, they retained their stance on innocence, ultimately taking that option away. Some even got their GED or college education while behind bars. Protesters went against what everyone had been saying at the time to overcome a city that had already made up its mind. Thousands took to the streets in support of exoneration for the Central Park Five. Many protested tirelessly, continuing all the way up until a shocking confession in 2002.
You hit her in the face? Yeah. I think it was straight. That's what she was facing up, definitely the face.
Matthias Reyes, known as the East Side Slasher, confessed after 12 years to being a lone attacker in the jogger case. Corey Wise was released from jail shortly thereafter. The Central Park Five was vacated of all crimes in 2002, only after having had to face a ruthless prison system, which forced them to practically grow up in jail. Stripped of their childhood, the now exonerated Five received a $41 million settlement. Donald Trump still refuses to apologize for the role he played in influencing the nation towards their conviction.
You have people on both sides of that. They admitted their guilt.
As well as Linda Fairstein, a lead prosecutor in the case, remains by her stance that they were still somehow involved. This just proves that although they had been cleared of any wrongdoing, the nation is sometimes so stubborn in their opinion that they refuse to admit their prejudgment. The Central Park Five had to break barriers of stereotyping and prejudgment to prove their innocence in the end. The case serves as a marker to highlight racial discrimination within the criminal justice system. Presumed criminal in the eyes of much of the nation from the very start, the Central Park Five broke barriers of racial discrimination within the criminal justice system. Although they found success in breaking down racial prejudice, it is still, unfortunately, a large part of America and especially its court system. This case proves to be an important start in correcting a racially charged and biased system.